Scrutiny Committee. We are here tonight for a call-in meeting, and I'm just going to go through. Have we had any apologies at all from anyone, firstly?
Yeah, apologies for absence has been received from Councillor Keneally and Councillor Shah.
Fantastic. For members of the public watching at home and those in the gallery, I'm going to ask everyone just to go along and introduce themselves. So starting with myself, I am Councillor Daniel Keneally. I am usually the Vice Chair, filling in for Councillor Keneally, and I'm going to ask everyone from my left to everyone go around and just introduce themselves quickly.
My name is Jason Sigbar and I'm the strategy lead supporting this committee.
I'm James Kinsella. I'm the Scrutiny and Governance Manager, and I'm deputising for Amira Nassar, who's the Deputy Director of Democratic Services tonight.
Councillor Sarkubat, Committee Member.
Liz Dixon, Councillor Liz Dixon, Committee Member.
Yeah, Councillor Janice Long, Committee Member.
Councillor Michael Maurice, Committee Member.
Councillor Mary Mitchell, Committee Member.
Anthony Malloy, Committee Member.
Councillor Paul Lauber from Sudbury Ward, one of the people who called this item in.
Ben Ainsworth, Head of Finance.
Nadine Khan, Chief Lawyer, Property Planning and Regeneration at Brent Legal.
Mark Greco, Senior Planning Lawyer for Brent Council.
Marsha Henry, Director of Law.
Councillor Mohammed Butt, Chair of the Barham Butt Trust Committee.
Danish Patel, I'm Head of Property.
Tanvir Ghani, Director of Property and Assets and Lead Officer for Barham Park Trust.
Rebecca Reid, Governance Officer.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can I please ask if there are any declarations of interest? I'm going to start down here with Councillor Butt and then move along the table.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. Yeah, I was on the Planning Committee. I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Committee, so I was on the committee that day when the decision was taken.
Hello, I'd like to declare also I was on Planning Committee when the decision was taken.
I was also on the Planning Committee when this decision was made. I was also one of the members of the call-in.
Okay. And Councillor Lauber.
Thank you. I'm a trustee of Friends of Barham Library and also Friends of Barham Park. And over the years, I have been approached by George Irvin, who discussed the issue of the two houses with me on numerous occasions. I do not feel as I'm representing local residents.
Okay, I'm going to just turn to legal there because I know some advice has been offered.
Yeah, sure. Just in relation to those that have sat in the Planning Committee, just looking at the 7 principles of the conduct in public life, we refer to the objectivity and the integrity. It's the way in which the average person might look at this and whether you are able to therefore advise the committee objectively. Obviously, there are differences in terms of what you have been deliberating on, but in relation to how it may be perceived, it would be best for you to stand back, in my opinion. That's the advice that I would give as a result of that.
Is that for the whole meeting? Stand back for the whole meeting or just for a bit of it?
I would say the restrictive covenant issues. The rest would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
In relation to Councillor Lauber, obviously I've already had correspondence with him. We advised that he should consider whether he has a personal interest. He's decided that he doesn't have one, and it is a matter for him to decide. Obviously, the issue would be if there was a complaint as a result of it, it would need to be investigated. So it's just bringing that to your attention.
Okay, so I will firstly advise Councillors Butt, Dixon and Maurice that what we will do is firstly take the decision on Akava and over the VAT first, and then we will vote on those points. And at that point, then I will ask you to leave the room, and thank you very much for your evening tonight and for joining us. Councillor Lauber, you've already answered what I was going to ask you, which is that you're not going to leave the room and you'll be joining the committee, but you've obviously been advised by legal, so that's all fine. Okay. So let's go back. So we now move on to the meat of the day, which is the call-in of Barham Park Trust Committee decision on the operational property matters and restrictive covenant. What I'm going to ask is for Councillor Paul Lawber to take a seat in the Speaker's chair and to address the committee. You will have 5 minutes, Councillor, and we will then ask you questions.
Thank you, Janet. I apologize for the length of the call-in, but it covers a lot of very important issues, and it highlights, sadly, a lot of failings that have occurred once again in relation to the conduct of the Barham Park Trust and the affairs of the charity. 700 people, over 700 local people, Wembley residents and the residents of the surrounding area have already signed a petition calling on the council not to lift the covenant. I asked to speak at the last meeting of the trust. That right was denied to me by the chair of the trust. One of the issues that I'm covering is the guidance to councils when they act as a trustee of charities. And the justification for councils acting as trustees of charities is that councils are embedded in the local community and know how the local community feels. If you, however, time and time again, refuse to listen to people from the community and representatives of the community, I think it highlights that perhaps that assumption in the case of Brent Council and the way it conducts its business is totally wrong. I strongly recommend, and I've distributed this, that this guidance is read, because it makes it very clear that in situations of serious conflict of interest that the council may have when dealing with an issue, the council considers whether they should appoint an independent trustee for the charity. In this case, we have a situation where the council approved the planning application, had a direct interest in the decision, and later on, the same council is facing a question about lifting a covenant that was put in place specifically to protect the interests of local people and to protect a particular decision which was made in 2011 in relation to sale of those two properties. There's a direct and obvious conflict of interest which this council cannot manage, and on that basis, it should appoint an independent trustee to consider the whole issues that are in front of us. So the covenant was placed to protect the park, and the purchaser knew that. They were buying two houses with very clear restrictions that there would be no more. The covenants made it very clear that it would be a car-free, that there would be restrictions in relation to cars and putting of other structures on that land. The planning permission that was approved in June 2023 designated the site as a car-free development. However, if you look at the report that went to the trust, and if you look at, I know it's below the line, but I don't think this aspect is, if you look at the valuation and the way that the evaluator looked at it, in both cases, there is a reference to each house having a car parking space and the lifting of other restrictions which are not allowed under the planning permission. Why? I'm being told that that would not have influenced the value that the value had arrived at. I don't believe that is the case. The committee was advised in September 2023 on the basis of the anticipated basis for valuations and the splitting of any gains or any profits. It is in front of us. It is part of the minutes. And the officers advised that the split is going to be, most likely, 50-50. If there is a gain of 500,000, the trust will get 250,000, the developer would get $250,000. I won't mention numbers, but if you actually look at the valuation that has been presented to us, the split is 3 for the developer, 1 for the trust. What's changed? Would the trustees have pursued the idea of lifting the covenant or varying the covenant had they known that the trust would receive so little? The
30
same
seconds,
report.
Councillor.
Can I just, I've got a few more, just very quickly. The trust was advised about a figure of £200,000. Nowhere in the report does it say that the costs of achieving that £200,000 would be met by the trust. So the trust will not receive £200,000 because the council has obtained barrister's advice, it has obtained valuation advice, and it will have to incur additional and substantial legal costs to conclude the process. There are so many flaws in the whole process that I would strongly recommend that this committee refers it back to the trust, or more, actually refers it to the full council to make a decision as to how this trust should be managed.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, I think we might have a couple of questions for you, Councillor. I'll just quickly go on to my first one. You've mentioned the need for an independent trustee on there. I was wondering if you could elaborate on what you think the benefits would be of that, firstly.
Well, the fundamental problem the council faces, and we've had this time and time again, when considering the planning application or whether considering the affairs of the trust, comments were made about having to meet the housing needs in the borough, and more importantly, in the context of the trust needs to find money, otherwise the council has to make the contribution and make up the difference. The guidance that's in front of you gives specific examples of cases that the Charity Commission and the LGA considers giving rise to a major conflict of interest, which the council is going to find difficult to manage. And one of the examples mirrors exactly the Brent situation. A theoretical council is considering of disposing of piece of land so that they generate money to contribute to the costs of running the rest of the land. An exact situation. And the recommendation is here, and the recommendation from the Charity Commission is that in that kind of situation, the council should very seriously consider whether the conflict of interest is so serious. And bear in mind, the conflict of interest isn't just assessed by us. It is assessed by members of the public and other people looking inwards at the council, that it is impossible to manage properly, and therefore an independent trustee should be appointed. Look at the guidance. It's crystal clear.
And one more for myself, and then I'm going to go to members. In regards to any consultations around this with the public, how do you feel they should be conducted, and what do you think the benefit of having these consultations would be?
This is Barham Park is a public park which was gifted to the people of Wembley for their recreation. People have a very, very close attachment to this park. They understand that it was a generous man who gifted it to them. They want to be listened to when it comes to the issues about management of the park. They have sort of accepted that sometime in the 1970s, the council, without realizing that this was a charitable asset, decided to build 2 houses for their employees, probably without ever bothering to get permission from anybody, including the Charity Commission. So it was a breach, but 50 years later, it's become accepted. So people will accept and tolerate that there are 2 houses in the park, but they do not want 4. They don't want another development in the park just to add to the mistakes that were made previously. And they want to be listened to. And they are not. They're not consulted, they are not informed, and they are completely ignored.
Okay, I think I've seen a hand from Councillor Mary Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, just a point of clarification. Your summary of this documentation, which I agree is very helpful, that you have kindly put in front of us, was that you pointed to the parallel between the situation the councillor's in with Barham Park and case study 1, which I agree with. I think your summary that you just presented now suggests that the council automatically was experiencing a conflict of interest and therefore needed to seek the Charity Commission's advice or sort of recuse itself from the situation. But actually, my reading of it is simply that it says there is a conflict of interest. If it cannot manage the conflict of interest, then it needs authority from the Charity Commission. Now, those are actually two quite different things. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Well, this is the actual government document. There are additional documents that you can Google and see where other authorities have given specific guidance to their own councils. And one actually happens to be, I can't remember, Tradford or some other council, which I managed to find via the Brain Council website. So it obviously, and there it's specifically the advisor who was advising that particular council said, ultimately, if you find it difficult to deal with that conflict, the best course of action is to appoint an independent trustee, because people looking in cannot question that. And the point I'm trying to make here is that if you go through the reports that are presented to the trust committee, although members and officers are always advised, you've got to look at the trust completely separate from the council. Every single meeting has a reference to the fact that Brain Council is contributing to the trust, whether it is officer time or whether it is money. We pick up some of the bills, okay? Clearly, somebody has reacted to that and said, well, we need to do something, therefore, we need to make sure that we generate some money so we no longer have to make a contribution. That, according to this, is a conflict of interest. And how do you, if it was just mentioned once, fine. If it's mentioned 10 times in the last 10 years, I think there is a lack of understanding and therefore lack of independence.
Any follow-up, councillor? Okay, I don't see any other hands. So, Councillor Lorber, thank you very much for your contribution. If you want to take your seat, see you in a bit. I'd like to welcome up to speaker's seat Gaynor Lloyd. You will have 4 minutes today. As I understand, you are speaking on behalf of Mr. Philip Grant, who can't be with us today. Is that correct?
It is. Who do you want, Philip first or me?
Then we'll go with you first and then we'll have Philip.
Okay, and I have to say first that Councillor Lorber has, as usual, stolen most of my thunder, but I'll still try and do it, okay? Ready? Right, for 30 years plus, I was a specialist commercial property partner in a city law firm working with clients' valuers. A lawyer exists to draft wording to reflect a bargain very precisely. Words set out what's been agreed for a price. Making restrictions looser or tighter has very real effects on value. Reading the report, I couldn't understand what had been agreed to replace the old restrictive covenants. And although the new wording should have been part of the valuer's instructions, it seems they could be changed by officers in negotiation, but with no reference back to see if change is reflected on value. And the new wording permits car parking and garages, even though the planning consent forbids both. Planners made clear that the development's car-free status was non-negotiable. Other calling grounds are very detailed. Do ask me if you don't get any of those. Well, what exactly should the valuer value? 4 houses as per planning? No, because opening up tight restrictions on all the land owned gives future hope value. Where is that valued? Nothing to stop the owner making another planning application, as it's done about 10 times before, once for a high-rise block. Planning when refused can be appealed, and this changes forever on the whole of the land. The report's legal guidance on disposing of charity land didn't include whether it should have consulted its beneficiaries, the public of Wembley, first, or to consider if a decision might be controversial, or that trustees must be aware of conflicts of interest, or that the charity's best interests are certainly not limited to financial interests. The council is liable to maintain this charity land. The Charity Commission wrote, drawing the urgent attention of all local authorities to the August 2024 guidance on the legal responsibilities of trusteeship, guidance prepared in consultation with the LGA. The call-in sets out case study 1 from that guidance. Reading it, you can see the scenario mirrored here. Facilitating this development is fraught with risks of conflict of interest for the trust. The council is the planning authority. There was substantial public objection. Despite public requests, the trust didn't even comment. Receipt of 200 grand will definitely stop the council subsidising the charity from public funds. Nothing in the report even flags the possibility of a conflict.
I'm afraid we have reached your time.
Can I finish the sentence, Daniel? Thank you. Nothing in the report even flags the possibility of a conflict of interest in this, let alone how to manage it. This should be referred to the Charity Commission. Sorry for the run over.
It's all right. Do we have any questions from committee members at this time? One from Councillor Lorber.
You question the detail in the report.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your experience. What would you have expected this report to have included for the trustees in terms of a brief?
Well, what I think I would have expected, particularly to give transparency to the public, is that the exact terms of what the valuer was being asked to value would be set out. In fact, it's almost impossible to understand from the report how the restrictive covenant is going to be listed. And that, in my experience, and as I said in here, I did this for 30 years. It's similar to when you're dealing with marriage value, when 2 pieces of land are being put together to facilitate a development. You get really, really detailed briefing because you're expected to put it into wording. Now, I haven't seen the valuation report, but I would have expected the brief to the valuer to say, these are the restrictive covenants. This is what we're going to replace them with. Can you bear that in mind when you're valuing? Because it's rather difficult to see the basis on which this valuation has been done. My experience, and I have been retired for 12 years, is that valuing getting rid of restrictive covenant is a specialist thing to do because there are all sorts of implications to this. As I say, what really surprised me is that when you're lifting those restrictions, you're not just if you're going to relate it to the planning consent, that doesn't entirely make sense because it's a permanent lifting of the restriction. And, so it's for 100 years. So those houses aren't going to be there forever. So you wouldn't be having a restrictive covenant, which would deal with the wording of the planning consent. But you see, it doesn't even really mirror the terms of the planning consent. What leapt out immediately, and you mentioned it as well, is the fact that, the developer's agent said in the planning committee, this is a non-negotiable, we know, it's a car-free development. So who put references in to those car spaces? In a sense, you could say that having car spaces would probably potentially add to the value of the houses. But, this has got to be right. And I have no idea, and I don't think the Trust Committee had any idea, what actually the replacement restrictive covenants would be. And the idea that the wording could be negotiated after the event is plain crazy, because that might have effect on valuation. Sorry, that was a very rambly answer.
No, that's fine. So, do you think, the report on page 19, we know what the planning permission is. Sorry. We know what the planning permission is. We also know what
Use your mic, Councillor.
We also know what the existing covenant is, i.e. restrictions about car parking, etc. And yet, the report says, suggesting the modification as being for residential dwelling and any associated infrastructure, including garages, outbuildings, etc. So would you expect a valuer to have put a greater value on the site as a result?
Well, I'm not a valuer, but I would have thought potentially 4 houses with a car park. Sorry. Okay. Common sense would say that 4 houses with a car parking space each is quite likely to have a higher market value than 4 houses without. So I suppose what I would have really thought, that I know there's always stuff about commercial confidentiality, but I would have thought that the minimum that will be expected will be to have the instructions to the valuer appended to the report, because then at least people would be able to see what was actually going to happen in the park after the event.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Maurice. I've seen your hand.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a possibility that the valuation was done favourably to the buyer of the houses or the land?
Well, it certainly shouldn't be, because obviously the valuer has got proper professional qualifications and he recites those. I assume, certainly it's referred to, that he's properly qualified. I don't know, because I haven't seen the valuation. I don't know whether all the things that are required. There are specific requirements from the Charity Commission when you are valuing this sort of thing. So I think it would be, I don't think he could possibly, well, I don't think we should infer that at all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Gaynor, I think it's time for your second submission, unless there's any other questions. No, I think we can go ahead.
Okay, so this is Philip Grant's statement. The report to the 24th February Trust Committee meeting states the restrictive covenants were imposed in August 2011 to preserve the area's character and limit development. Those aims are just as important now as they were in 2011. Barham Park is one of Brent's historic parks and landscapes, a heritage asset which the council promised to protect. The covenant does that by prohibiting any development in or on the property, which is inside the park and a site of importance for nature conservation. The Planning Committee was misled into granting the development consent in 2023, and I'll explain why if you ask. So the covenant is the last line of protection. The Trust's February decisions appear to mirror the Council's property strategy, which Cabinet approved last year. They do not reflect the charitable aims of the Trust or the wishes of residents who are meant to be its beneficiaries. The Charity Commission recommended local people should have a voice in the Trust's decisions, and 2 years ago I suggested to Deborah Norman how this could be achieved. My idea was ignored in the governance review later that year, and the Chair refused to allow my suggestion to be heard by the Trust Committee in September 2023. Other residents and councillors have also had requests to speak refused. Brent Council is the sole trustee, and as the Trust Committee are not acting in the Trust's best interests, I would ask you please to refer the matter back for further consideration.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Okay, I don't see any hands. Thank you very much, Gaynor, for your time. Okay. All right. We now move on to the Chair of Barham Trust, Councillor Mohammed Butt.
Thank you very much. The reports in front of you have outlined the process that we have followed. The trust, just to assure everyone, has received advice and guidance from the officers and from our legal teams in order to make sure that we're fully compliant with the requirements as set out in relation to our charitable requirements. The committee itself has received the requisite training that makes sure that we're absolutely compliant with all the necessary requirements and regulations that we need to comply with. And all decisions that are made in the best interest of the trust itself, and the decisions are absolutely made in accordance with our requirements as trustee members. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Right, just before we proceed, I just want to make sure that moving forwards, we are honouring the correct legal advice given here. So just to confirm the position that we will be taking, page, come on. Sorry, we'll be taking points. We'll be talking around the allocated funding of year one works first, and then the authorisation of the release gear for Unit 6 with Akava first at this time, and then we will be accepting councillors who need to leave, giving them legal advice from the second part of the meeting. Okay, so we'll try and keep questions restricted to those topics first. All right. Okay, is that all good with everyone? Excellent. Of course.
So the introduction that we've had from Councillor Butt is a very similar kind of introduction that we get from other members of the trustees when they come and present to us. We had it previously. It wasn't Councillor Butt, it was one of his colleagues who told us she has full confidence in the officers of the council and the way that the affairs of the trust are carried out. I have no doubt that everybody has the best possible intentions, but I will just remind you that I raised issues relating to this trust and loss of substantial sums of money, and nobody believed me. They related to failures to carry out rent reviews, failures to collect rents, failures to charge interest on rent debts, failure to charge service charges, failure to charge utilities, all overlooked over numerous years, all covered up. What's happened since, without any acknowledgement or any update in response to my claims, the council embarked on sorting out the back rent in relation to the failure to conduct rent reviews, have just notified the tenants that interest will be charged on any rent arrears, have started collecting or have failed to collect the rent arrears, and have agreed that they will start charging service charges from the 1st of April. Cumulatively, the trust has suffered substantial losses that nobody has as yet quantified. And the trust is not the only loser because of the failings of the way that the affairs of Barham Park were dealt with. And I will therefore tell you about the new thing that I uncovered, which has probably cost...
Councillor Lorber.
No, let me
Councillor
do
Lorber,
this.
no,
Don't
no.
stop me, because this is important.
You did have your 5 minutes.
Right.
I am going to cut you off at this point because this is not a time for another statement. This is a time for questions. We've set out how we're going to do this meeting.
Okay.
And if you've got questions around anything you feel you've uncovered, that's fine.
I will ask
But
a question
let's
then.
stick to the agenda then.
I will ask a direct question.
Right.
At a meeting on the 1st of September 2021 of the Barham Park Trust Committee, a decision was made. A decision was made that Unit 8 would be sublet by the council to a Brent organization, and
Councillor
that
Lorber,
the legal service...
Councillor Lorber,
No,
at this stage, we're not discussing that at this stage. We're discussing the Akava release and we are discussing the year one works because we want to make sure that committee members are here for the right things. I don't want to be having people in a compromised position. So please, can we keep our questions as requested to those points at the moment, please, before those members leave? Councillor Malloy.
Yeah, Councillor, but the failure to respect the car free provision in the planning permission seems to be a bone of contention. Given that we've been told that that don't affect the valuation, can we row back on that?
I will ask my the team here in order to sort of answer some of those questions which may have legal implications and in relation to that question as well.
I think that there are things that will need to be considered as part of an individual's rights as well, in order to have access to transportation, etc., and everything else. I was going to.
So there is no plans to breach the planning permission. The restrictive covenants will align with the planning permission. It's as simple as that. The report doesn't refer to motor vehicles, it refers to vehicles. Vehicles also includes cycle and cycle parking as well. So just wanted to clarify that.
I'm just going to come in on planning points, if I may. I'm not a valuer, so I'm going to leave the valuation to valuation experts, but I've got 3 points to make on the planning, just to put in context some of the legalities to make sure that we're all on the same page. So my 3 points are as follows. The first one is that the sale of the 2 properties were lawfully disposed by the trust in 2011. So they're no longer part of the trust holdings. They are now private residential properties outside of the trust estates. So what remains with the trust are certain restrictive covenants imposed on those titles back when that sale took place. I'll come back to the restrictive covenants in a moment. Now, the planning permission, and you should have a copy of it, came forward and was granted on the 13th of June 2023. So they're very separate times, very separate occasions. So sale 2011, permission 2023. So that's the first point. The second point is to do with the modification of the covenant rights. Now, this is not a disposal of the parkland. The present proposal, therefore, is not a sale or a transfer of the actual land. It's not disposing of any charity-owned land or public open space. And so I want to just stress that what the trust only retains now, and what we're concerned about, is the covenant interests. That's the modification of which does not distract from the public use or enjoyment of the actual park. And the last point I want to make, my third point, is in relation to the covenant terms against vis-a-vis the planning permission, the planning condition. Now, the trust will not agree to any covenant release that permits more than what the planning permission actually allows. So the intent here is to actually mirror the scope of the approved development. So nothing more and nothing less. So condition 3 of the planning permission specifically talks about removing permitted development rights for extension outbuildings and the like. And of course, again, that will be part of how we deal with the covenant. It will be drafted to permit no extension or outbuilding unless aligned with that current planning permission. And then condition 28, which goes to your point about car-free development, is specifically drawn up to basically provide measures to prevent vehicles parking within the curtilage of those dwelling houses. Specifically gives a reason that this is done to prevent, to have car-free developments. Again, we will make sure that the covenant does not authorize something that the planning permission prohibits. So I just want to make it very clear that's going to be extremely tight and followed through legally.
Okay, before I go to any more questions, I'm just going to interject and remind people that obviously because of certain advice given from legal, we are trying to stick at the moment to the allocated funding around VAT, and we are also looking at the ACAVA because I do not want councillors to be put in a compromised position. So if we can keep questions to those subjects, I'm going to kick us off now, and then we will discuss those issues later. So I ask committee members to note what they've heard and store any questions for a bit later, please. Thank you. Okay, so in relation to the funding of Year Works 1 and the provision of VAT, can officers please advise us as to whether this is redeemable and can be used as unrestricted funds?
I'll come in terms of the context around the figure that was used in the September report. So when the September report was produced, it was based on an assessment from a surveyor, which was specifically around works costs, capital costs. So that 269,000 circa quote was specifically on the capital works. It did not allow for any professional consultants that we would need to employ on top. So with the passage of time, which is 6-7 months have now passed, we've now got a project surveyor on board. There may be other consultants that we will need to help bring forward a tender to appoint a contractor. So the new ask in terms of the circa 350K figure that was put in the February paper was to allow for 10% professional fees, and also the new information that we've got with regards to VAT treatment. Now, I'm not an accountant, so hopefully Ben will come in on the point around how VAT is looked at within the context of charitable assets. So Ben, over to you on that one, please.
So there are special rules around VAT recovery for charity trusts that are sole, where the local authority is the sole trustee. And these are different to the rules for the council. The council has very generous rules around what VAT it can recover that I won't go into detail because we'd be here all night. The trust can recover a much more restricted amount of VAT and not the same level as the council can. In particular, the trust can only recover VAT on its non-business activities and not on its business activities.
All right, thank you very much for that clarification. Are there any questions on that area for members of the committee? I can see Councillor Orber's hand.
So when did this come to light?
This was identified as work was done on finalising the total cost for the latest report.
Okay, so can I just clarify then? Probably 18 months ago, the trust was considering a substantial investment in the Barham Park relating to building hotel rooms and shops. The trustees were advised of the likely investment that would require. Did those costs that were presented to the trustees include the VAT cost or not?
I believe those were exclusive of VAT.
You see my point, Councillor? £3 million was the cost. VAT on £3 million is £600,000. That's the reserves of the trust gone. Who advised the trustees to go ahead, pursue a project costing 3 million plus unrecoverable VAT of maybe £600,000, causing a lot of fear and concern to local residents and local community groups which occupy Barham Park. And here we are, still pursuing that particular project. And we are being told that the chair of the trust has confidence in his fellow trustees and in the people advising the trust. I think there comes a time where we, as councillors, have to challenge that trust, because people need to earn that trust, and the succession of what has been happening to this trust over the last 10 years, where vast sums of money were squandered on surveys, consultants that were never delivered on, needs to be highlighted. And the trustees, the current trustees, including the chair, needs to be removed so that people who have the expertise and the ability to actually challenge the advice that they receive are in place for the benefit of this charity and for the benefit of the people of Brent.
Are there any more questions on the issue of VAT from any committee members? No. Okay. In regards to the negotiation and the renegotiation, I should say, of Unit 6 with Akava, can I ask officers, firstly, about the question of the arrears? Obviously, it's strange to re-enter negotiations halfway through with a break clause, especially when there are such high arrears as well. And we'll be going into figures here, so that's part of the closed report. But can we get some understanding as to how the board of the trustees will be seeking to ensure that all that money is fully repaid and up to date as soon as possible?
Thank you. So I don't want to talk about areas of individual tenants for obvious reasons, but we are in early discussions with Akava on the lease re-year. And one of the conditions will be any tenants wanting to re-gear their lease has to have cleared any arrears that they do owe. So a lease gear will not proceed if the tenant is in debt.
Okay, that's good to hear. And secondly, I just wanted to see how, in regards to a commercial rent here, whether we were looking at getting a maximum commercial rent here and how that was being calculated, and whether that was sustainable moving forwards for anyone rented the property.
So are we talking about Unit 6 still? Or? Yeah, so we will carry out a valuation, and we may have to carry out a pro rata valuation as well on their current rent, because they currently have one lease for a number of units. But there will be an independent valuation carried out for the trust, and negotiations will proceed on that basis.
Okay, and finally from me, we know the challenges in the commercial rent market at the moment. That's been quite widely reported. If the building does remain vacant for a substantial period of time, can the trust afford that, and how long can it afford it for?
Well, it's never good when units remain vacant for long periods of time. But we will, I mean, that's a commercial risk. We will market the property. There is demand in the borough for commercial units, particularly in that area. And we remain confident that we can let it within a reasonable period of time. That does not mean that there won't be a period when that particular unit remains vacant. But of course, we will try to do a back-to-back if at all possible. But it might not be possible, but we'll do our best.
Okay, I can see Councillor Lorbert's hand. The officers.
The trust could opt to register for VAT, but at the moment it doesn't have any vatable income source, so it wouldn't have any way of recovering the VAT on its business activities. If it was to opt, there is something called opting to tax property, which means that you ordinarily, a property that you lease out would be exempt from VAT, which means that you don't pay any VAT. If you opt to tax the property, then anybody renting that property has to pay 20% VAT. The trust could hypothetically opt to tax those properties and charge the tenants 20% VAT. That may be that would be potentially a change in contract that would require negotiation with those tenants. In addition, if the tenants were able to pay an extra 20%, the trust would be better having an extra 20% of rent rather than VAT, because it would have greater flexibility in how it could use that money, whereas VAT, any VAT it would receive would need to be paid over to HMRC, less the costs that it recovers.
I'm just going to bring Tanvir in here, and then I'll come back to you.
I was just going to make a point on the essential works. So I understand VAT treatment potentially could have benefits and costs, but the longer it takes to get a tender to market, construction inflation quarterly goes up. So the money that we have or we're asking for will become less through the construction inflation that's passing through every quarter. So what I'm saying is it shouldn't be a case of we should look at these options and hold fire on the tendering for the essential works. We could look at the two in parallel, but ultimately find hopefully the most pound-rich approach for the trust.
Councillor Lorber?
I'm the last person who would argue for delays in repairing the buildings in Barham Park, as you know. On the issue of the two Akava units, it's perfectly reasonable to come to an agreement with Akava, but that has to be conditional that there is no loss to the trust. And that basically means that if they surrender or re-gear or call it what you like, they continue to pay whatever the due rent is for those two units until such time as the council has been successful in reletting it. There should not be an unpaid void period, and there is no reason for it because this is a negotiation and an agreement. Those two units are very small. They're in a terrible state as far as I know, and they're going to be very difficult to let as part of a marketing exercise.
So just to say that that would not be fair on the existing tenant. And what we have to remember is that the trust, when letting properties out, is engaged in commercial activity, which and obviously there is inherent risk within commercial activity. But you also have to balance out the sustainability of existing tenants as well. So that's really an important factor. So yeah, so like I said, you know, it's important that we relet the unit as soon as possible if this proposal goes ahead. But it's a question of mitigating that risk as best as possible.
Okay. Are there any other questions at all on either of these subjects? All right then. Okay. So what I'm going to do is at this stage, we're going to go to a vote on the issues that we have just heard. So just to remind the committee members and those watching at home that we are voting on right now on the approval of an increase in the allocated funds for year one works from 268,950,000 plus professional fees to account for VAT and seek charity commission approval. And we're also looking at authorise the director of property and assets to negotiate and finalise the lease re-gear for units with Akava. So we have two options for the committee to consider. The first option is that the committee does not wish to refer these matters back to the decision maker or to the council, at which point the decision is deemed to be confirmed and takes effect immediately following the meeting. Option two is that the committee decides to ask the Barham Park Trustee Committee to reconsider the decisions made in light of any observations of the committee. So I'm going to put that out to a vote to all committee members.
I think we should approve the expenditure that the officers have recommended. However, we refer the issue of the VAT back to the trust to obtain full advice, specifically on the trust's ability to recover VAT on the substantial refurbishment that is planned, whenever it is, 2031. And in that context, to get advice as to how VAT can be mitigated, whether it is an election, whether it is a decision to elect for VAT or not. But the trust now needs some proper advice because the sums of money involved will be substantial. On the other issue, I would recommend that the Akava re-gear, bearing in mind the kind of history we've had, right, is referred back to the trust committee on the basis that they investigate the best way of protecting the interests of the trust so that there are no further losses to the trust as a result of their relationship with Akava.
Okay, so my understanding is that these are the two options available to us to vote on. and that tonight we're not seeking to make recommendations. We're looking to agree whether this needs to be called back in or it doesn't at this time. So unless I hear otherwise, I'm going to proceed to a vote. I think that's the right way to go. So I'm going to ask committee members for a show of hands to show on first point, does the committee wish to refer this matter back to the Barham Park Trustee Committee? If I can see a show of hands to send this back, please, to the trustees. Okay, we have one vote from Councillor Lorber. If I can see a show of hands for those who do not wish to refer this matter back. Okay, and any abstentions?
Sorry, Chair, I'd like to vote on the first thing, the first option, please.
All right, that's fine. That's all right. So I think that has carried. So we will not be referring these first 2 points back to the trustees at Barham Park. At this moment, I'd like to thank Councillors Butt, Dixon and Maurice for their time tonight and coming down. Thank you very much. You are excused for the rest of the meeting.
First of all, before we go, we were told that at the planning committee, when you're on the planning committee, that covenants are not a material planning consideration. So we couldn't take what was in those we couldn't take those into account. Why then are we why are we then asked to leave the meeting when we couldn't consider that in the first place?
You're right, you couldn't consider it, and that's something that the officers would have advised you, but it's really looking at whether you can be impartial and objective now. You've agreed that the development should go ahead. In order for the development to go ahead, or you may not have agreed, that doesn't matter, but in order for the development to go ahead, the restrictive covenants have to be disposed of or modified. So that's what the issue is that the fact that you've already voted in relation to the development.
Unit 8.
What you're discussing. Yeah, you did unit 6.
Yeah, I think we've already covered that that's the year funding, isn't it? Yeah, that's I think we've already covered that. Yeah, I think we've already covered that, Councillor, but we can ask questions on that as we go. That's fine. I'll ask if you've got any more questions. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think we're covered here. Yeah, that's fine. No, so
Chair, before we leave, as you know, I was on that planning committee. The chair of the planning committee happens to be the partner of the deputy chair of the trustee. The chair's brother-in-law and brother both sat on that planning committee. Nobody declared any personal interest in it.
I don't think that is a personal interest. Why would that have any material impact on what is going on here?
Also, I'm going to interject and add that the consent was granted in 2023. If it was an issue or you had an issue with it or someone did, they had 6 weeks in effect to bring forward a judicial review. So any challenge to that is long gone. We can't reopen the planning commission.
okay. Councillor Maurice, I'm going to thank you very much for your time. Thank you all very much. Councillor Lorber, in regards to Unit 8, my understanding is that it's not one of the decisions we're making tonight. That we are making decisions on Unit 6, the VAT, the restricted covenant, and seeking Charity Commission approval. Those are what we're voting on this evening, just for clarification. Okay. Once Councillor Maurice leaves, we will be able to restart. Okay. Could you clarify exactly what you're talking about there, Councillor Lorber? Sorry. Thank you. So we're considering the decisions that have been called in. If you have questions relating to the rest of the document, if you want to tie those in, that I'm more than happy for that. But this is what we're voting on tonight. So this is the structure of it. Okay. Okay, so the trust has not made decisions on Unit 8 to the best of my knowledge. It's a recommendation, as you say. This committee can only consider those decisions that the trustees and the committee have made. And my understanding is, and the advice I've received from officers, is that that is the 4 items that I have previously walked us through. We have covered the issues that those 3 councillors were able to stay in the room pending legal advice. And we are moving on now to the following issues, which are seeking Charity Commission consideration and the issues around the restricted covenant. Now, following Councillor Malloy's earlier question, I think it's important that we go back to that at this stage and see first and foremost if there is anything that members wish to pick up following that earlier conversation. And, oh, I see Tanya.
Yeah, I just want to make a point on Unit 8. If you look at the February 25 committee report, there are no recommendations made to the Trust Committee about Unit 8. That's why we're not necessarily having a debate about that.
Okay. So is there anything that we want to move on to on the restricted covenant? Because I think it's important that we go back to that. And if we can maybe have a quick summary of what was discussed earlier, just to remind members where we're at. Arthur, would you be able to provide that?
What summary would you like, just in relation to the covenant terms vis-a-vis the planning?
Just a quick reminder, yeah, so that was a while ago.
Yes, it was just to say that the trust will not agree to any covenant release that permits more than the planning permission allows. And I said that the intent is really just to mirror exactly the scope of the approved development. And I referred to condition 3 that's in the planning permission about removing certain permitted development rights, and also condition 28, which is about making sure that it's a car-free development. And again, all of that drafting will align with that planning permission.
Okay, thank you very much there. I'm going to go to a question for myself first, very quickly. It's a question I asked Councillor Lawber earlier. Do we need to consider a consultation here in the public interest? And if so, what would be the benefits to the trust of taking on such a consultation? And in your opinion, how far should that actually go? Should it just be in the Sudbury area, or should it be in the wider Wembley area as well?
So in our view, we don't believe consultation is required. So what we say here is that whilst we accept the restrictive covenant is held in trust for a charity in accordance with section 121A of the Charity Act, and the restrictive covenant benefits the land in which it relates to, we do not accept that the cottages are to be used for the purposes or any particular purpose of the charity, that they amount to a designated land, or that the consequential publication and engagement requirements in section 121 apply. Accordingly, we will be requesting the Charity Commission formally dispenses with the requirement of section 121 in our section 105 application. Sorry, I'll slow down. Whilst we accept the restrictive covenant is held in trust for a charity in accordance with section 121A of the Charity Act 2011, and the restrictive covenant benefits the land in which it relates to, we do not accept the cottages are to be used for the purposes or any particular purpose of the charity, that they amount to a designated land, or that the consequential publication and engagements requirements in section 121 apply. Accordingly, we will be requesting the Charity Commission formally dispenses with the requirements of section 121 in our section 105 application.
Okay. You've made obviously your position on that clear. Now, there are obviously 500 plus residents have signed a petition, as we've heard earlier. They obviously would like to have a say on what is built in the park, what is used in the park moving forward. So I hope that will be taken into consideration and any decisions moving forwards. But what I want to make sure is not going to happen here is, if we do proceed moving forwards, that there is no boundary creep in this and how we go about preventing that moving forwards. Because what we're dealing with here is a green space, public park, and we want to make sure that if this decision is going ahead, that there is no chance of overdevelopment and creeping onto public land and use of the park.
Yeah, so we can assure that there won't be, we will ensure that the development stays within the current title, and that will require independent surveyor to verify that prior to and during the development as well.
Councillor Lorber.
I heard the comments about planning and the covenants, but anybody who will pick up the trust report for the 24th of February 2025 and gets to, which is page 3, and reads paragraph 3.9 onwards, which are headed proposed modification, might be somewhat concerned. Why were these paragraphs, which clearly conflict with the conditions imposed on planning, included in this report in the first place? And why, we are below the line now, why did the valuer refer to car parking spaces in relation to every single of the 4 new houses, unless somebody told him? Or there's been some negotiation happening, George Irving coming to the table and saying, I have got planning permission, is restrictive, I'm building a house which will be valued at £900,000. I'm never going to make anything out of it or get the chance to dispose of it, because nobody's going to buy a house for £900,000 if they can't park outside it. Therefore, do us a favor, let's just lift the covenant. How do we know those discussions haven't taken place? On the basis of the evidence, both in the officer's report and in the valuer's documents, clearly somebody has spoken to somebody and said, think about parking spaces.
So can I just reassure the committee that the designated advisor is working exclusively for the trust and not the council and not the owner of the land. So as a professional, their report is exclusively for the benefit of the trust. So that's the first point. The second point is it's a valuer judgment when they look for comparable evidence in the marketplace, and there won't be, it's rare to find evidence in the market which is exact with the property being valued, that they will use their professional judgment to collate that evidence to support their valuation. And that's effectively what happens.
Okay, Chair. We have a lot of intelligence people here, and we know through our own experience how valuations are arrived at. Okay? I go to a valuer because I have a property and say to them, I want this property valued because I have 2 scenarios. One is I own 50% of the property, and the person who's got the other 50% wants to buy me out. The other scenario is I need the valuation for probate. That valuer will give me, helpfully, because I'm paying his fee, a valuation which is high when it comes to the 50-50 deal, low when it comes to the probate. Looking at the way this valuation has been arrived by Mr. Walsh, and I've spoken to people who know Mr. Walsh, he has worked backwards. Somebody offered £200,000. He justified a valuation of £200,000. And if you're going to say that is not correct, I will insist that you prove it. By releasing all documents and all conversations that have taken place in relation to this with Mr. Irving by all the officers of this council.
Okay, so.
And in any case, why is not the deal conditional? We know it's speculative. We know we don't know what the development costs will be, what the other costs are. Why not come to a deal? And why the officer's not saying the deal is if the ultimate valuation is 500,000, you pay us X for the covenant. But if the valuation at the end of the day, once you've completed it, having eliminated all the risks, is £700,000, you pay us X plus. He already hints in this report, in his valuation, that at some future date, because of other developments in the area, it may be possible for somebody to come forward and say, this site is capable of delivering more than 4 units. Where is our share of the potential upside, unless there isn't a very clear condition, as he recommends, that any future disposal we get a cutout or share of?
Okay. So in regards to Mr. Walsh, I don't think we should be making accusations about him or how he's gone about doing this, as he's not here to defend himself. He reports to the trustees, not to the committee. And I don't think it's fair to be hinting at his work is not up to standard at this stage when he's not here. But I will ask whether we have received maximum value for this valuation, whether we feel that another valuation could prove of any benefit, and that would give potentially multiple options here, because if I was selling my house, obviously I would seek 1, 2, maybe even 3 independent estate agents. So using that scenario, would another valuation be of any benefit to the board and the trustees?
The short answer is no. I should just remind the committee that chartered surveyors have to abide by the highest professional and ethical standards dictated by the RICS. Sorry, could you just repeat? So in terms of alternative valuation?
Maximum valuation and also alternatives.
It's the best terms reasonably obtainable for the change that is proposed. And the restrictive covenants will not permit any further changes unless agreed by the trust committee in the future. So if in 10, 15 years' time, there's a proposal to develop more, the owner would have to come back to the trust committee to have those restrictive covenants amended.
Just to further add to that, we have engaged the Charity Commission and shared with them the outputs of the February 25 committee report, the various legal advice and valuation information that we received today. And they have said they will not be engaging with the trustees anymore based on the information that's been provided. So there is no value to the process for trying to secure different valuation reports, because an organisation like the Charity Commission acts independently and they have objectively viewed the information that's been presented. So overall, I've got to say I don't see any value other than to further frustrate the process that we've been undertaking so far, and it will ultimately undermine the trust's position with regards to future negotiations on completing this transaction.
All right, I want to just finish this up by saying I want to make sure that this is in line with 2 things. First and foremost, it's in line with the objectives of the trusts and the best interest of the charity, but also I want to make sure that we are also in line with planning consent and regulation, and I'm hoping you can answer that, Tanvir.
Yeah, so the one definitive we do have is a planning permission for the development that is allowed on that site. So the valuation has been undertaken in terms of the gross development value in line with the planning permission for 4 3-bed dwellings based on a 3-story construction.
Councillor Lorber, yeah.
What does recommendation 2.1 mean when it refers to the modifications as set out in paragraph 3.8 to 311, which talk about garages, parking spaces, and everything else? The trust agreed modifications which do not comply with the planning decisions. That's the recommendation. Tell me otherwise.
We're talking semantics here. The actual covenant in terms of its modification will need to be drafted through the conveyancing process. There will be independent solicitors acting on our side, as there will be on the other side. We will ensure through that process that there is no back gate open to allow for some other development to take place.
So I'll go first and probably D may want to add a few bits later, earlier. So I just want to go to page 18 and 19 of the report, which is the 3.8, 3.9 to 3.11 that you talk about the modifications, the proposed modifications. So just remember that was in the planning permission. So I think you said earlier, it might have been very alarming for someone or confusing, but the simple thing to be done is to pick up the TP1 that was kind of dated 12th of August 2011, which actually shows all the restrictive covenants in there, and then look at why 3.9 and 3.10 were actually proposed. And in essence, these were actually just to allow this development to come through. So it works through each one because there are 3, 4, 5, 6 in effect restricted covenants, and that's why there are headings at the way they are. So it talks about, you know, the first one, for example, is a restriction that says not to use the property otherwise than a single private dwelling. Well, because planning permission has been granted for 4, that restriction needs to come off. But again, it is just to allow those 4 buildings and nothing more. So there'll be a restriction again, not to permit any other sort of development. So that's how it's been worked through. So all that needed to be done is sort of an exercise looking between both of those documents. The second point I wanted to draw your attention is like paragraph 3.11. It specifically says that these modifications preserve reasonable protections while enabling the approved redevelopment. The precise wording of the changes may be further refined or amended during the legal conveyancing process, which is correct because there's a very separate process to the planning process, and that hasn't been finalised yet. So like anything, a bit like, so if you sit on the planning committee, you get heads of terms for Section 106 agreement. Usually there's an umbrella term or some kind of terms imposed on there, but actually how you refine that and finalise it, that's part of the legal process afterwards between the various parties and the solicitors. So this is what's happening here, but with regards to restrictive covenant. As I'll pass you on to Nadeem now, because he has been dealing with actually the drafting.
So I'm preparing the deed of variation to the restrictive covenants. And my starting position is something which I don't believe is controversial on the part of the trustees, which is that the modifications will only authorize what the planning permission authorizes. In other words, the restrictive covenants will be aligned with the planning permission. That will be done very carefully, but it's a document which will then have to be presented to the other side solicitors. They'll have comments. They'll come back with suggested changes and observations. So at the moment, it's a working document, but the aim is to make sure that where we end up is restrictive covenants which are modified in order to allow the development to take place in accordance with the planning permission and all the conditions that relate to the planning permission.
Okay, so can I just say one quick clarification that what officers are saying here is that in your opinion, there is no significant changes here that to the covenant here by the refinement that is being proposed.
The significant changes to allow this permission granted in 2023. That's the only change. There'll be nothing more added. So it'll be no more or no less than the planning permission granted in 2023.
Thank you very much.
I still don't understand why these paragraphs are here.
Mary?
Yes, so thank you. That's really helpful. Can you help me understand, as a non-legal expert, unfamiliar with the surveillancy process, why it is necessary to have this this sort of changing of the restrictions, where specifically where it talks about vehicles and storage restrictions, and there's reference to cars, etc., parking, which we've talked about. Why is it necessary for that to be there if the planning permission specifically it's a car-free development and there won't be a need for parking? I understand what you've said in terms of there'll be an alignment between the two, but I just don't really understand why we need to modify the restrictions to allow vehicle access when we've heard that that's not part of the planning permission that was granted in 23. Does that make sense? Does that
I
question make
think it
sense?
does.
Yeah.
Let me just say what I'm going to say and tell me if we're both aligned on the same page. So we're not allowing cars. Vehicle is a term that can actually also include cycles, which fall within that. So the actual permission mandates for the site to be car-free. So there will be no residential parking on the site, and there will be measures in place to actually prevent it. So the covenant will not create any sort of inconsistency there. I'm not sure if Nadeem has actually making any change to that one specifically, or not at all, but they will remain a car-free development. There will be no motor vehicles, of course, only essential access for emergency services and the like.
So just as a follow-up, sorry, so when it says then, including the parking of vehicles by residents and visitors in designated parking areas, yeah.
The way you're reading.
Sorry, unfortunately, it's just a bullet point, but it's a bullet
Is
point
that
within
page what?
310, page 19. It's the third bullet point in 310 on page 19. Yes, so the second half of that paragraph, it says, including the parking of vehicles by residents and visitors in designated parking areas as approved under planning permission. So we've just heard the planning permission is a car-free development.
It is.
Are you saying then that this parking of vehicles is not referring to car vehicles?
It's not car vehicles because we've got a condition, condition 28, that specifically says there won't be that. So my understanding of this is to relate to do with any bicycle parking, this stuff like that. This probably could have been better worded. I admit that. I didn't write it. But we are restricted by the permission, which is condition 28 that says it'll be a car-free development.
And just on the back of that, for example, one of the limbs of the existing restrictive covenant is that no trailers, mobile homes, caravans, carts or boats may be parked at any part of the property. That will be left untouched, for example. There's no need for us to tinker with that.
So why does it say then? It specifically says, in that same paragraph, it says the restriction on standing or supporting vehicles, commercial vehicle trailers, mobile homes, caravans, trailers, carts or boats will be modified. It says is modified to permit reasonable residential use. So why did we need to say it's being modified if you're saying that it's not going to be modified?
Okay. Everything will flow from the fact that the variations and modifications to the restrictive covenant will allow the development. So we're working backwards from what the planning permission allows you to do. So all of these will be looked at and modified. And if there is a need to modify that in order, and this is the golden point, in order to align it with the planning permission, then we will modify that.
So I will add that. I don't know if you've got the permission in front of you. I'm just going to read condition 28.
It's in the papers.
Yeah, okay. It does say prior to first occupation of the development approved, details of measures to prevent vehicle parking within the curtilage of the dwelling house shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. Such measures shall thereafter be implemented in accordance with the approved measures and retained and maintained in accordance with those measures throughout the lifetime of the development. And it specifically gives a reason to say to ensure a suitably sustainable development in terms of a car-free development and in the interest of amenities of users of Barham Park. So I'm assuming, because this is prior to first occupation, that there'll be some details put in there to sort of show how you are going to be preventing vehicle parking. So this might have not been drafted properly, quite correctly. I don't know why it was done that, but we are restricted by condition 28. I can't give any more certainty than that this is what we need to adhere to. We won't.
I do understand that, and I am reassured by that clarification that planning is ultimately what is adhered to. I think it just is confusing at best and misleading at worst that we have been presented with, and these were approved, well, there was a recommendation to approve these, what are they called? Modifications, these proposed modifications that don't seem to align at all and sort of they're a much wider scope than what's actually allowed under planning, and that just seems a bit confusing. And I guess just, is that something that you would all expect sitting there for this process to happen, or are you looking at this and thinking, oh yeah, that's a lot wider in scope and that's unusual to see that?
Well, all our developments are car-free developments nowadays.
Sorry, I'm not referring to that. I'm referring to the fact that these recommendations for modifications are very, very wide in scope.
I wouldn't say they're wide in scope. I think you're referring to only one, which is the accessway and parking restrictions. And as I said, evidently that hasn't been drafted correctly. That's not what we would ever go by. We would go by the legal audit, in effect, which will be the planning permission. Whereas, and Nadim would draft the restrictive covenants, he would run it by me as the senior planning lawyer to make sure he's in adherence with that permission before I sign off on that. So we would never go by a bullet point in a report like this. I think this was probably just not written correctly, whoever had written it. But there is, thankfully, you know, it does say comply with planning permission 22, 41, 28, which is this is, and actually that's what we're going to be complying with.
Understood. Thank you. Sorry, one further question. These modifications that we're discussing, are they just in relation to this development, or will these be permanent modifications that can therefore apply to anything else that comes up in Barham?
No, it's just in relation to that property because they run with that land specifically, and that's why they need to be lifted to allow this permission to come through, just for that site.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Long, I've seen a hand, then I'm going to go to Councillor Law.
The clarification on the parking issue. When they're built, where will the furniture removal van actually be allowed to park? Or has it got to be on Harrow Road, given all this wording? And similarly for service vehicles, if you've got a tradesperson, where will they be able to park?
I can't answer that for you, but all I can say, and I'm sure that as part of those kind of measures that will be submitted, you know, consideration will be given by the planning officers for something like that. But there must be parkings elsewhere outside where you literally unpack and then walk your goods into your house.
Cannot park your furniture van within this boundary of these properties, according to...
Well, this is a car-free development, so you no cars. And if it's a motor car, then there is no car. Can't go there.
It's a PTEL 5.
Further questions, Councillor Long? No. Councillor Lorber?
It's not just that paragraph that's wrong, obviously, because the paragraph above is also wrong because it talks about garages. And it's totally inexplicable because the existing covenants which we have before us put the restrictions in place and are very clear as to what the restrictions are. And they are in line with the planning permission. So why anybody would have put in proposed modification into this report in terms which are completely confusing people, and give the impression that everything that was approved at planning no longer stands. And you can't just say, sorry, when the legal officers do the process and do the writing up of the documents, they will of course do that. What happens if those officers move and somebody has forgotten? This has to go back to the committee and for these paragraphs to be withdrawn and the correct position confirmed. Because I know you stopped me from talking about Unit 8, but I will give you an example so that you know what I'm talking about. In 2021, a decision was made that legal officers would enter into a legal rental agreement in relation to Unit 8 occupied by Young Brain Foundation. That never happened. 4.5 years later, that organization is leaving those premises, never having paid a single piece of rent, £50,000 lost by Brain Council, probably never paying any business rates, probably the trust paying for all your utilities and all the services, £100,000 of public money, because a decision recorded in the Barham Trust Committee minutes in 1st of September 2021 was never implemented. And I know you think I'm having a go, but I'm only having a go because I'm prepared to forgive a mistake. People make mistakes, but this is more than just a mistake. The way that the trust has been carried on for a very long time is not a mistake. It's actually a cover-up. People never admit that they got it wrong, and they never admit that something needs to improve and something needs to change. And it is, you can silence me, you can tell me to bugger off, I don't care. But the chief executive said, I feel passionate about Barham Park. No, I don't feel passionate about Barham Park. I am passionate about proper governance in this authority and proper professional conduct by everybody involved in it. Barham Park Trust doesn't fall into a category of an organization and a body that has been professionally run either by the trustees or by officers to whom the role delegated was given. And that's why I'm so angry and so passionate about bringing call-ins and other things to this committee, and nobody ever listens to us, and the losses mount.
I'm going to go to officers.
I just want to correct something that I said to Councillor Mitchell, actually, just to clarify something, and to Councillor Lorber, and because I'm just rereading that point, and actually it's Councillor Long that's probably made me think a little bit more about the question that you posed. So actually, page 19 is correct, that bullet point, because if I look closer at it, it's about modifying it to allow vehicle and pedestrian access as required for the lawful residential use of the property. So that would be something like dropping somebody off, let's say in a wheelchair, or the removal van, for example, but ensures that any access arrangements comply with the restriction of no car free development, where the condition 28 specifically talks about preventing vehicle parking. So you can't stay there permanently, but it is allowed a little bit to be able to access for lawful residential use, but it will be a car-free development. So that's probably what that's trying to get to, in effect, to try and say, you know, if there's a ban completely, well, how do we make sure that they can just get in and get out? But again, it's about making sure that everything sticks with what the planning decision has actually said.
Yeah, can I just also add that every single one of these clauses does actually specify the planning permission. So for example, the point about the garages, it actually says the restriction, it talks about the actual restriction on erecting buildings or structured, is modified to permit the construction of the 4 residential dwellings that no one is disputing, and any associated, it doesn't say that there will be, and any associated infrastructure, including garages, outbuildings and landscaping, in accordance with the planning permission 224128. So every single one of these clauses does actually point to the planning permission itself.
So why didn't you just simply say we're going to stick to the existing clauses in the covenant? Why make it more complicated than you need to? The covenant is very restricted. That's why we did it. I was there in 2011 to protect the park.
Because if you don't modify the existing restrictive covenant, you're not going to get over the 2 plots. You're not going to get 4 properties. That is not in alignment with the planning permit.
The covenant says no garages. If you put a garage in, you're not going to have enough land for a plot for 4 houses. So why talk about garages? That's my point.
Okay. Can I see if there are any more questions from any committee members at this time? All right. With that, then, I guess we're going to bring it to a vote. Thank you all very much for your time. What we're voting on, just to remind members here, is the 2 points that we're voting on are firstly approve seeking Charity Commission consideration of qualified surveyor's report and the authorisation under section 105 of the Charities Act to modify or discharge the convents, and also approve the modification of the restrictive covenants of 776 and 778 Harrow Road as detailed in paragraphs 3.8 to 3.1, and this refers to the agreed sum of £200,000 as well. So I'll just remind committee members that we are here to vote on the points raised already. So as previously, I will ask committee members.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt you. This is quite important.
Right.
There was, I think Tanvir said that the council has had Charity Commission advice that everything that we were doing was correct. We have not seen that advice. Can we see it, please?
Okay. Right.
I will confer with my legal colleagues. And on the back of that, we'll be able to make a response.
I don't know what that means. Why can't we have it today before we vote? Was the advice too?
Hold on, isn't it approve seeking the Charity Commission's advice? So has that, or has been sought, but has that been received yet?
You need to apply.
Yeah.
So we will need to formally apply. I mean, Marsha can help me with the exact technical process that we'd have to go through. But we've
No,
had.
I'm referring to, I thought you said we already had advice.
So there were some questions raised by a member of the public to the Charity Commission. Charity Commission then raised some inquiries with us in terms of the process and what we'd be doing, and that is what they've consented to. So the exact process that we are going to use, we confirmed to the Charity Commission. The Charity Commission have confirmed that they are happy with the process. So we are now going to go ahead with that. So that's what we can give to you, but that's where we are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right.
I was just going to make a point around why are we putting ourselves through this pain is because there's a investment strategy behind the value that the restrictive covenant modification gives to the trust. So that six-figure sum will go back into the the restricted funds, which are currently being used to pay for the essential works. The rental income that we generate isn't sufficient to prop up the asset for years to come. So there is a value to the trust and an investment plan behind why modifying this restricted covenant is so important, because we are potentially starving Barham Park of real capital investment.
All right, okay. We're going to bring that now to a close. We are going to go to a vote. We've already discussed the points that we are voting on, so I'm going to ask very quickly for a show of hands now as to whether committee members believe that we should refer these decisions, as previously stated, back to the Barham Park Trust Committee tonight, or alternatively, whether the committee does not wish to refer these matters back to the decision maker or to the council, at which point they will be deemed to be confirmed and take effect immediately following the meeting. Okay, so can I see a show of hands firstly for those who believe that we should send this decision back to the Barham Park Trust Committee, please? Show of hands. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. And can I have a show of hands for those who do not believe that we should refer these matters back to the decision maker or the council? All right, okay, that's everyone there. So at this moment, we have seen that the committee has decided on all 4 points not to refer these matters back to the council or to the decision maker at this time. And these decisions will, as say, take effect immediately following the meeting. I want to thank officers and members for their time tonight and ask finally if there is any other urgent business that we need to attend to before we close. No show of hands. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.